Hello, you're welcome to Synergy Aesthetic Plastic Surgery. This is a typical shape of an hourglass lady. Every woman desires to have an hourglass shape. In fact, that is the characteristic thing about a woman's shape that distinguishes a woman from a man. A man generally has a roughly straight shape without curves. So, if you take a look at a woman, the waist to hip ratio is always different from that of a man. What is the waist to hip ratio? If you look at the waist, let's assume the waist is 40 inches and the hips is 50 inches. By the time you do the maths, the figure will be less than 1. The smaller the waist, the more curvy a lady appears to be. Okay? Now, in discussing this topic, I want us to take a look at 3 key points in a woman's body. These are points we call inflection points. The inflection points, one, around the bust, and then around the waist, and lastly around the hips. When you take a look at these 3 points, they depict areas that will determine what your shape is like as a woman. Now, a study done by Dr. Singh of the Department of Psychology, University of Texas, he found out that on an average, ladies whose waist to hip ratio is around 0.7, they are often regarded as the most attractive. Of course, any woman who has a waist to hip ratio of less than 0.8 is already looking like an hourglass. However, if it gets down to as low as 0.7, you are more regarded as an attractive person than someone whose waist to hip ratio is higher than 8. Now, can the waist to hip ratio be smaller than 0.7? Yes, it can, whether by surgery or natural looks. However, people don't often find those ones as typically attractive. In this study, over 50 years of data were used, and then all the men that were interviewed, almost all of them, in fact significantly so, found out that those with a ratio of 0.7 were the most attractive. Now, when we talk about the waist to hip ratio, it is used for first aesthetics, as we have just discussed, and also for health assessments. If your waist to hip ratio is high, like over 0.9 for a man, it is regarded as not so healthy. For a woman, if it is more than 0.85, you're also regarded as not so healthy. So the smaller your waist to hip ratio, the better your health statistics. But we're not talking about health statistics at this time. We're looking at the aesthetic part of the waist to hip ratio and its significance in shaping your body. So, take a look at these various shapes. Here you have the rectangle, and then you have the triangle, and of course, the inverted triangle, the hourglass, the diamond shape, and lastly, the round or apple shape. When you take a look at these figures, every woman, regardless of their race, regardless of their tribe, regardless of wherever they come from or their shape and body weight, they can be categorized into one of these 6 shapes. By far the most common is the rectangular shape. You might ask, is there any human being who is rectangular in shape? We're going to show you the next picture. When you look at the shoulder and the hips, they are about the same. The shoulder, the waist, and the hips are close. So they appear straight in outline. The silhouette appears like this. There's less indentation around the waistline. And of course, they have a balanced upper and lower part of the body. When you see this is a typical figure of a woman who is rectangular in shape. And incidentally, about 46% of women have this shape. It doesn't matter the tribe, it doesn't matter the country, it doesn't matter the race. However, the percentage of the occurrence of these shapes vary from race to race, from country to country. Okay, let's take a look at another shape, which is the triangular shape. In looking at the triangular shape, the upper body is much smaller than the lower body. So when you take a look, you'll see that the circumference here is smaller than the circumference around the hips. So they look like a triangle in this format. The weight and width sits more in the lower body. Some ladies call them slim thick. Slim in the upper part and thicker in the lower part. And it can also be called the pear-shaped figure, like a pear. If you know the typical shape of a pear, this is how it looks. So this is the triangular shape of a woman. Now let's take a look at another shape. This is the reverse triangle. What is the major characteristic here? In the reverse triangle, the upper body is way wider than the lower body. If you look at the shoulder area, the diameter here, or the circumference, however you look at it, is way wider than around the hips. When you look at this kind of shape, a lot of them come out to be about 14%. About 14% of women are like this. However, from my own findings, in this part of the world, it is much more than this figure. So many of our ladies have wider upper body than the lower body. And they're actually the most difficult streets in terms of body contouring, because most women want to have an hourglass shape. These ladies have very difficult. The reason is that the body structure here cannot be altered. What you will do is to do all you can to increase the width, of course, the width of the hips, right? So doing something for this kind of ladies takes a lot of skills and is most Herculean. Now let's look at the hourglass shape. In looking at this hourglass shape, the shoulders and the hips. The shoulders and hips are essentially the same or slightly wider on the lower part, but the most significant thing is that the waistline is curved in, such that it gives you a figure of an hourglass or a figure of 8. So when you have this shape, this is typically what we call as the hourglass shape. And this hourglass shape is about 8% in occurrence amongst the categorization of different shapes for a woman. Obviously, this is the most desirable. As I said, about 8% on an average across race, across the weight categories. Now, let's take a look at another one. This is a round shape or apple shape. Here, the waist circumference is very wide, and then of course, the ladies are usually bulky. And then the main part is the midsection. The midsection is loaded with a lot of fat. And then the shape appears like this. When you see this, you can know this is the round shape or apple shape. Another shape is the diamond shape. In the diamond shape, the love handles project far wider than the upper parts. So you can take a look. The widest point is around the midsection, around the love handle area. such that by the time you work out the shape, it looks like a diamond. So understand that the shoulder and the hips, they look narrower than the midsection. So this is essentially a diamond-shaped figure. Now, to recap, you have the rectangular shape, about 46%. You have the triangular shape, which is about 20%. You now have the reverse triangle, which is about 14%. And then the hourglass, which is about 8%. Then these two, roughly about 6% on average each. So you can easily compare all of these to the geometric shapes that you have here. Rectangle, the triangular, reverse triangle, or the inverted triangle, the hourglass, the diamond shape, as well as the round shape. So everyone fits into one of these shapes. And then in asking for a body contouring procedure, first, a lady should understand what kind of shape she has. And the second thing you want to know is, what do you want to be like? As I said earlier, almost every woman wants to be an hourglass shape. Almost every woman. And then, in achieving this, a lot of factors are involved. Your body structure. If your body structure already has a narrow hips, as you have here, getting this kind of shape may not be achievable in one sitting. That's why you see that some people have first round, they look better than before, and then they are told that they need a second round. It's not because the surgeon just wants you to come back. It is because the surgeon wants you to recover, take some time off, and then have enough space and fat to possibly increase your hips. Alright? So these are the various shapes you have in a woman. If you have any other questions, please, you can ask in the comment section, or you can send us a DM. Thank you very much.